A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. Chapter 2, Breakfast. "Mum," Connor asked, stepping into the kitchen. He knew she wouldn't be there. He couldn't hear the kettle boiling, which she always did first thing, but he'd found himself asking her a lot lately when she entered the rooms in the house. He didn't want to startle her, just in case she'd fallen asleep somewhere she hadn't planned to. But she wasn't in the kitchen, which meant she was probably still in bed, which meant Connor would have to make his own breakfast, something he'd grown used to doing. Fine. Good, in fact, especially this morning. He walked quickly to the bin and stuffed the plastic bag he was carrying down near the bottom, covering it up with the other rubbish so it wouldn't be obvious. "There," he said to no one, and stood breathing for a second. Then he nodded to himself and said, "Breakfast." Some bread in the toaster, some cereal in a bowl, some juice in a glass, and he was ready to go, sitting down at the little table in the kitchen to eat. His mum had her own bread and cereal, which she brought from a health food shop in town, and which Connor thankfully didn't have to share. It tasted as unhappy as it looked. He looked up at the clock, 25 minutes before he had to leave. He was already in his school uniform, his rucksack packed for the day, waiting by the front door. All things he'd done for himself. He sat with his back to the kitchen window, the one over the sink that looked over their small back garden, across the train tracks and up to the church with its graveyard and its yew tree. Connor took another bite of his cereal. His chewing was the only sound in the whole house. It had been a dream. What else could it have been? When he'd opened his eyes this morning, the first thing he'd looked at, was his window. It had still been there, of course. No damage at all. No gaping hole into the back garden. Of course it had. Only a baby would have thought it really happened. Only a baby would believe that a tree, seriously a tree, had walked down the hill and attacked the house. He'd laughed a little at the thought, at how stupid it all was, and he'd stepped out of bed. To the sound of a crunch beneath his feet, every inch of his bedroom floor was covered with short, spiky yew tree leaves. He put another bite of cereal in his mouth, definitely not looking at the rubbish bin where he had stuffed the plastic bag full of leaves he'd swept up this morning, first thing. It had been a windy night. They'd clearly blown in through his open window. Clearly. He finished his cereal and toast, drank the last of the juice, then rinsed the dishes and put them in the dishwasher. Still 20 minutes to go. He decided to empty the rubbish bin altogether, less risky that way, and took the bag out to the wheelie bin in the front of the house. Since he was already making the trip, he gathered up the recycling and put that out too. Then he got a load of sheets going in the washer that he'd hang out on the line when he got back home from school. He went back to the kitchen and looked at the clock. Still 10 minutes left. Still no sign of "Connor," he heard at the top of the stairs. He let out a long breath he hadn't realised he was holding in. "You've had breakfast?" his mum asked, leaning against the kitchen door frame. "Yes, Mum," Connor said, rucksack in his hand. "You're sure?" "Yes, Mum." She looked at him doubtfully. Connor rolled his eyes. "Toast and cereal and juice," he said. "I put the dishes in the dishwasher." "And took the rubbish out," his mum said quietly, looking at how neat he'd left the kitchen. "There's washing going too," Connor said. "You're a good boy," she said, and though she was smiling, he could hear sadness in it too. "I'm sorry I wasn't up." "It's okay." "It's just this new round of—" "It's okay," Connor said. She stopped, but she still smiled back at him. She hadn't tied her scarf round her head yet this morning, and her bare scalp looked soft, too fragile in the morning light, like a baby's. It made Connor's stomach hurt to see it. "Was that you I heard last night?" she asked. Connor froze. "When?" "Sometime after midnight, must have been," she said, shuffling over to switch on the kettle. "I thought I was dreaming, but I could have sworn I heard your voice." "Probably just talking in my sleep," Connor said flatly. "Probably," his mum yawned. She took her mug off the rack hanging by the fridge. "I forgot to tell you," she said lightly. "Your grandma's coming by tomorrow." Connor's shoulders sank. "Oh, Mum." "I know," she said, "but you shouldn't have to make your own breakfast every morning." "Every morning?" Connor said. "How long is she going to be here?" "Connor." "We don't need her here." "You know how I get at this point in the treatment, Connor. We've been okay so far." "Connor!" his mum snapped, so harshly it seemed to surprise them both. There was a long silence, and she smiled again, looking really, really tired. "I'll try to keep it as short as possible, okay?" she said. "I know you don't like giving up your room, and I'm sorry. I wouldn't have asked her if I didn't need her to come. All right. Connor had to sleep on the settee every time his grandmother came to stay. But that wasn't it. He didn't like the way she talked to him, like he was an employer under evaluation, an evaluation he was going to fail. Plus, they had always managed so far, just the two of them, no matter how bad the treatments had made her feel. It was the price she paid to get better, so why? Only a couple of nights, his mum said, as if she could read his mind. Don't worry, okay? He picked the zip on his rucksack, not saying anything, trying to think of other things, and then he remembered the bag of leaves he'd stuffed into the rubbish bin. Maybe Grandma was staying in his room wasn't the worst thing that could happen. There's the smile I love, his mum said, reaching for the kettle as it clicked off. Then she said with a mock horror, She's going to bring me some of her old wigs. Can you believe it? She rubbed her bare hand with her free hand. I'll look like zombie Margaret Thatcher. I'm going to be late, Connor said, eyeing the clock. Okay, sweetheart, she said, teetering over to kiss him on the forehead. You're a good boy, she said again. I wish you didn't have to be quite so good. As he left to head off for school, he saw her take her tea over to the kitchen window above the sink, and when he opened the door to leave, he heard her say, There's that old yew tree, as if she were talking to herself.